So, policy, we understand, is one of the critical pillars of the transition to scale that we are talking about, and a critical way in which we need to collaborate with policy innovators. So I would like to introduce you to a policy innovator, specifically Peter LaFontaine, who is the Agricultural Policy Manager for Friends of Mississippi River. And he's going to present some perspectives on opportunities, I think, to bring particular innovations forward that can build some momentum.
So like Nick said, I'm Peter LaFontaine. I'm the Ag Policy Manager at Friends of the Mississippi River. Our team, along with folks like Steve Morse and various other people here in the room, helps to lead advocacy efforts for a variety of interconnected programs that gets more CLC crops onto the landscape. Like everyone else you've heard from, I feel like I'm contractually obligated to say that this is a coalition effort, but it really is true that many of you are pulling an oar alongside us. For those of you who aren't, we need you. We need your ideas, we need your presence, we need your political connections, we often need your SSRIs. So please come talk to me after the conference if you'd like to hear more and open up some more chains of collaboration. It would take basically all day to lay out in any detail the barriers that we're facing. And a lot of the folks have already touched on these things already, so I'll just keep this really brief. Most of these cropping systems lack dedicated insurance products, so producers assume a lot of risk. The markets aren't developed, so entrepreneurs like Christopher assume a lot of risk. There is, the Forever Green research team has a wish list for equipment that's about 20 feet long. State policymakers here in Minnesota, with some very important exceptions, have largely stayed committed to investing in legacy programs and approaches. These categories here aren't hard and fast, but in terms of workflow and relationships, I tend to think of what we're doing along these three divisions. First, supporting Forever Green's various programs, the R&D, the commercialization, and some of the farmer adoption work that they're doing. Second, direct support for the supply chain businesses. And third, incentivizing adoption of CLC crops within existing markets, specifically winter oilseeds through climate and transportation policy. So let's work through those. Since around 2015, our coalition has led efforts to fund Forever Green, which has resulted in around $20 million in state funding. It's not enough, but it is a big number. And there's more if we count investments in closely related projects that aren't part of that core program. This has allowed Forever Green to build out its team, to launch the competitive grants process for crop research that they have internal to their program, and develop the eco-implementation program that you've heard a bit about today. That wish list I mentioned is very real, and it would be tremendously impactful if we could achieve our long-term goal of $5 million per year for Forever Green R&D. You'll notice that most of this, the blue bars, comes from the Minnesota Clean Water Fund, and the yellow label, ENRTF, stands for the Environment and Natural Resources Trust Fund. Both of these are dedicated funds that operate a little bit outside of the legislative process. We've got some representatives here, John Barton from Clean Water Fund. Folks have really have taken the long view in those sort of quasi-legislative bodies. We've gotten a lot of support. And we've also been really successful recently, thanks to the work of folks like Jenny Cleavorn, to get Forever Green funding added to the base budget. That's the green there, the sort of regular budget for the state of Minnesota. That was a big success that we had a couple of years ago. Second leg of our work pertains to that direct support for market development. Colin and maybe Christopher mentioned this Developing Markets for Continuous Living Cover Crops program. Again, that was launched in 2023 on our first attempt at the legislature. And it really originated in a conversation that Colin, Christopher, and the state rep representing Northfield at the time had basically around the idea of trying to answer the question, like, we have a state investment account for renewable energy that's been really successful over the years. Why can't we do the same thing for CLC crops? And it turns out we could. We developed this program in partnership with a lot of folks from across the spectrum, but leaned really heavily on the experience and the needs of the business community itself. MDA staff, led by Margaret Wagner and her team, have really bought in. They've helped to think about this program creatively. I think we're all getting smarter together about what investments can really catalyze this transformation that we need. And I think, besides just getting money into the hands of the businesses that need it, this has really brought more folks to the table. We'd heard early on in the process of advocacy that there was some tension about having all of this funding nominally going towards sustainable agriculture, but it felt to some people like a lot of it was just staying here at the university. And so to find a way to get more folks involved, to have more folks with an actual stake in the system, has been a really successful way of demonstrating what we're all about here and figuring out ways that more people can participate. We've got big ambitions to scale this sort of program, both within MDA, also perhaps around other state agencies that will have to probably come in future sessions. For these two programs in particular, I want to note how important it has been that we work across the aisle. We've worked closely from the beginning with both Democrats and Republicans on this work. It's required a lot of outreach, a lot of field visits to businesses, talking with people who are involved in these programs who are their constituents so that they see this as in service to their constituents and not just another thing that the university is doing. It's a nonpartisan thing. We've had really high levels of success, I think, because everybody sees a benefit, whether it's clean water, whether it's rural development, whether it's climate adaptation and mitigation. There's something for everyone in this work. And I also want to note the sort of unique character of the partnership itself and who's here at the table. I've spent the last 15 or so years as a professional conservationist, and sort of like Mitch alluded to earlier, I didn't necessarily expect to be sitting at the same table with Cargill, but it's been great. They've brought resources to the work. Turns out they don't bite. They are, they're the ones that really sort of validate this for a really big section of the American industry and political world that we need to have on board with this stuff. There's also folks like Land Stewardship Project who are approaching this with more of a sort of paradigm shifting mentality. We need that as well. We need folks working from both inside and outside the system. Ultimately, our whole premise is to move this stuff off of the public ledger and have industry and markets carry the day. So this brings us to the third major pillar of our work, trying to embed this within climate and transportation programs. Last couple of years, we've been working really hard on both sustainable aviation fuel with the Minnesota SAF Hub and a proposal to develop a Minnesota clean transportation standard. Both of these would really help to focus attention on sustainable biofuels like winter camelina and pennycress, and do it in the service of reducing transportation sector emissions. So there's a really big lever that we can pull there. I would love to talk a lot more about SAF. I'm getting the red card, unfortunately, much like my high school soccer days. So I will speed through here. I just want to point out here, this is the strategic framework that the SAF Hub has put out in the world. And I think you'll see there at the end, incorporating cover crop-based production, contingent on seed evolution, good on researchers. This is something that Forever Green Partnership really brought to the SAF conversation. And I think that there's an enormous lever there that we can pull on. I just want to say, we're not expecting a lot of positive momentum in the next couple of years at the federal level, but we do have big plans that are ready to unleash when the environment is right. I think I'm probably out of time, so I will end there and thank you all.
Well, it's my pleasure and honor to introduce Roger Wyse. So on the one hand, Roger Wyse is co-founder and managing partner of Spruce Capital Management, which is an important investor in regenerative agriculture innovation. He's also a member of an important scientific advisory body of the National Academies, the Board on Agriculture and Natural Resources. That's on the one hand. On the other hand, he's the elder brother of Don Wyse. So he's interesting for both reasons, I think. So Roger, please come up and tell us what's on your mind.
So it's been a really interesting day, actually an interesting 2 days. So maybe let me start with a couple of observations. Last night, we went to the Seal Prize, which turned out to be the Don and Carmen show. And I would say then sitting through today and looking at all the work that you all are doing to address some really tough problems, my conclusion is my little brother did okay. Now, most of what I was going to talk about has been touched on during today. I don't think there's a topic that I'm going to mention that hasn't been touched on. So you're going to hear more of a summary and maybe a little different slant on some of the things that were talked about. I'm going to bring it more from the private sector side, where I've spent the last 25 years. I would also observe that as I look at the research you're doing and then the relationship you have with the legislature, with the policy development, you got all the right elements here for success. I think my closing challenge is going to be, though, to rethink the strategy, rethink how can we speed and reduce time to market. I did a think tank a few years ago to think about what could we do to reduce time to market for products going into the bio-based economy, which is what you're doing. It now takes us 20 to 25 years to bring a product to market. How can we reduce that by half? So when I leave you at the end of this talk, I'm going to kind of follow up what Dawn said earlier. Rethink what you're doing and think about how you can make that impact come sooner. So what I'm going to talk to you about is a number of policy issues. I'm going to talk a little bit about some innovation that's going on in the private sector, and it's going to build on the talk you just heard about insurance being one of those. But the question is, how do we get to scale and impact? Because what we want to do is we want to solve the problem, right? We're problem solvers, and we want to get to scale. And our total addressable market, frankly, is that 180 million acres of corn and soybeans, right? That's the market that we really need to be impacting. And all what you're doing is kind of leading to that strategy and having that kind of impact. And you only have to look at the news over the last few weeks and you see sandstorms, right? Don must be turning over because that's exactly what continuous living cover is supposed to address. But it's still happening in 2025, which is really unacceptable. Now, one of the problems we have is the speed of adoption. And I'm going to come back to that over and over again because it's important for impact, but it's also important to attract investors and businesses into this space. If it takes so long to get to market, you can't get a return on that investment. You're not going to get the capital you need to drive the innovation and the commercialization. So we're right now, corn and soybeans, we're about 8, probably maybe 10% of the acreage is even in cover crops, let alone cash cover crops. We've gone through the barriers. You've heard the discussion today, so I don't have to spend time on that. But I'm going to come back to this cost and risk to convert. If there's any place we need to really think about, what do we do to reduce that risk of farmer adoption of new technologies? It's not just in this space. I can give you a number of my companies that it's that rate of adoption is really important to getting onto the field, but also a return on investment for those early stage companies. And also then the market side of it. We got chaos in Washington today. Investors have shut down because there's not that consistent projection of what the market's going to look like over time. And any investor, whether it's a business or a financial investor, they're going to hold back because we can price risk, but if we don't understand the risk, we can't price, so we're not going to invest. So it's a really important part. And lastly, this is mentioned a couple of times here today, all the big companies talk a lot about sustainability, but they don't like to pay for it. And so we have to think about how can we connect the value that farmers are generating on their farms by adopting these new practices, and how can we get that as a guaranteed financial return back to them. So if you look at the distribution of cover crop adoption across the U.S., is certainly not uniform. It's going to be affected by the cropping system that you're integrating into, the climate, and policy. Because if you look at that really blue area, that's the Chesapeake Bay. And that has been kind of a model for adoption of these kind of practices. And it's a very valuable economic resource. It's a source of fishing, crabbing, tourism, boating. So it's a really important, valuable asset to that East Coast area. And the farmers get paid $100 an acre to use cover crops, right? So that's the community understanding the importance and paying for it, right? And so the question is, that's a really intense area, high population, it's a clear asset. How do we think creatively now to do those same kind of things out here in the Midwest where it's less dense? So I think we can learn from some of the things that are happening in these areas that have the intense relationships between the value that people see and the return to farmers. So you've heard this several times today. It's a balanced approach, right? We're thinking about a three-legged stool. We have the research, which many of you are contributing to in a very fundamental way. Very important. It's all about the R&D, right? If you don't have the research done, you don't have the new varieties, the new crops, it's not going to work. You heard from Colin a number of times about the initiatives on marketing. The question is, how do you scale that? What we heard a lot about was small markets. How do we scale that to really large markets like sustainable aviation fuel? And then that third leg of the stool, obviously, is policy. And you've heard some of the things that are going on here in Minnesota. But for me, if you look across why we haven't implemented the cover crops, it's all about policy, right? We haven't had we have had disincentives, right? You lose crop insurance. What farmer is going to take that risk? So policy is a really important part of it. And it's not just the federal government, it's got to be state and even local governments get engaged in getting the right policy in place. Now, one of the things that it was mentioned, I'm a member of the National Academy of Sciences, and we are put together a workforce to look at what are some of the principles that underlie would be foundational to enlightened policies. And we're just starting that process now. There's been a little disruption in Washington, so we got delayed, but we are getting started now and putting that together. So it'd be a bunch of principles that would underpin policy that would link farm income to the value that farmers generate. And so what you're looking to do is to have farmers put products into the bio-based economy and get paid for in an equitable way for creating that value. The question is, how do you capture it, right? We talk a lot about ecosystem credits, but how do you really capture it? And then lastly, to not just pay farmers for it, but link it to their adoption of regenerative practices. So it becomes a growing cycle of producing higher value products. So let me now maybe put that in the context broadly of the bio-based economy. If we look at regenerative agriculture, you all know the benefits that come out of that. It could increase profitability, climate resiliency, all those kinds of things. And there is this issue of improving community health, human health, and if you just saw the recent things that came out from Washington, Make America Healthy Again, because he did talk about this exact issue, right? He's a supporter of regenerative agriculture. So if we can capture some of that, I think that would be a timely thing to do. The other side of it is the bioeconomy. And we have a lot of interest now in moving to a bio-based economy. And there are a number of mechanisms to capture value there. There's companies doing bio-based chemicals, food ingredients, and you heard a lot today about biofuels and sustainable aviation fuel. Well, farmers are the foundation of a bio-based economy. They're the ones that are producing the feedstocks that go into it. But we have to think about, and one thing I can leave you with here, we have to really think about how to capture that value but not in the food system, right? You don't want to increase food prices. You want to capture that value outside of the food system. And one can do, sustainable aviation fuel is a good example. But as we look at capturing some of the value that farmers are creating in those various markets where sustainability is valued, then those credits have to come back and be shared equitably with the farmers. And key to that is policy, right? That's one of the things that we have to really think about creatively is how do we link that, make sure those linkages happen and happen in an equitable way and not to impact food prices. So it's capturing value in the markets outside of food. And sustainable aviation fuel is a great example. It's a good case study. And we actually used that at the Academy as to kind of set the principles that we were going to work on. And you're already engaged in that here. You put together principles, and you're putting together a strategy for winter camelina. But sustainable aviation fuel, the same thing is true in the low-carbon fuels market. There's markets there where credits or value is generated and captured, and you feed that back into inducing farmers, improving their income, but also inducing them to use more regenerative practices. And as a result of that, you increase the acreage and adoption. So I think this is an opportunity to really think creatively about how the policy can help make that happen. So let me just close with a couple of things about the private sector. So it was talked about how do we finance this more rapid adoption. That's really important. The field I'm in, where I'm investing in innovative companies, the biggest problem is how fast can they get their product into the market. So farmers are very conservative. They want to watch how that's going to work on their farm, and so it takes time. Time is money, and so for small companies, that's a very precious resource. So reducing that time is critically important. So one of the companies is producing a green bond where they're going out to the likes of Goldman Sachs, UBS, and raising a couple $100 million. That would then be used, just like you're doing here at a smaller scale, to reduce the risk to early adopters. Now, it turns out that the company, because their product is launching faster, they have their contribution margin will actually pay that bond back. So if you can get the product into the market, generate revenue from reoccurring use by farmers, those bonds will pay off by themselves. And so getting good traction on Wall Street, like the likes of Goldman Sachs and UBS to do something like that. So it's really a product that a company can have to enhance the adoption of their products. You heard some examples here today about financing regenerative agriculture, Farmers Business Network, and there's a bunch of others that have low interest loans that they make available to farmers to increase adoption. And the other thing that I'm working on is something called innovation insurance, and it relates to the talk that was given here a few minutes ago, where what you want to do is to, again, accelerate adoption by having insurance available to cover the performance guarantee that a small company might put out. A small company might be able to do it on a few 100,000 acres, but when you start to get to millions of acres, and one of my companies has product on 10 million acres. Well, you start doing a performance guarantee on that, you have to have a pretty hefty balance sheet. So this is a way the private insurers are interested in this kind of a product where, as we're developing it, they're doing an X Prize to look at what are some of the innovation we can put into that product. Now, the product, and it was mentioned, the biggest issue is trying to predict the risk, right? And if you can't predict the risk, you can't price the product. And so we're doing an X Prize to have a whole bunch of creative ideas about how to price risk and what kind of structures this insurance product would have. And one of the ideas is to use AI. Everyone wants to use AI, right? So use AI to try to pull the data together to better understand that early stage risk, but that's the big barrier. So let me close by just saying what we're trying to do is really hard, because we're trying to solve a problem, and we're trying to capture value back out of that. And the problem is in the commons, right? We all own it, but nobody owns it. And so how do we capture that value in a whole new paradigm to support what needs to be done, improving farming, changing farming systems, improve farm income, and produce food and fiber and fuels for a healthier economy and healthier country. The last thing I was just going to kind of leave you with was where I started. I do think I've been talking here about how do you accelerate adoption and how do you move to impact. And I would certainly challenge Forever Green to rethink about, kind of step back and say, how can we get on acreage faster? You still have to do all the great science, but maybe there's a way you deploy your products into the marketplace would allow that impact to occur sooner. And think of it as a business, right? We're doing science, but we're putting products into the market. So there has to be a business element to the decisions that we make. So thank you all very much. It's been a long day, but hopefully as we leave here, we're going to be energized about not only the challenge, but the opportunity that we have as a group. It's a unique group here to address some really tough problems. I think you called it a wicked problem last night. And so it's a tough problem, but you've got all the right elements for success, and I wish you all well. Thank you.
A couple of reflections. So we're here to talk about this vision and how to move it forward and how to improve it and expand it. And I think we've done that. We just got a call from Roger. Figure out how to do this more strategically, faster. Make sure that it's, contributing to planetary solvency and not insolvency. Make sure that it's rooted in the values of farmer ownership and farmer leadership. Those are all things that we need to carry with us as we move forward. And the other thing I've heard today is that we all have a role to play. Ann Schwegel said it. Margaret Wagner said it. And before this event, Don Wyse-Pester said, you need to tell these people what you need from them. And I had this rip-roaring thing ready to do that. I'm going to dial that back. I think everybody knows what the role is that we need you to play in this partnership, whether you're a farmer, whether you're a small company, a large company, you work on policy, you're at a state agency. We all know that we need to work together and innovate to continue to take this, hopefully in Margaret's very hopeful wording, not that we're only at the stage of potential, but that we've made progress and that we can accelerate that progress in a really significant way. So all I want to say is that coming out of this, we're going to build on the DNA that is baked into Forever Green, which is that we are organizers. Started out that we were scientific organizers, bringing together research teams. We've broadened that out. We're going to be moving forward out of this event with all of you and many others in another bigger round of organizing to bring together all the different links of the chain that are necessary to achieve that scaling in a fast and efficient way that is still rooted in the values. And why is that going to happen? Because we'll have those people at the table to help us shape it. You can't lift one link and over here and another link over here. You have to lift all the links at the same time, and that's what we want to do together with all of you.
Well, thank you, Mitch, for those inspiring, integrating words. And indeed, we wanted to close with a few perspectives from a couple of very important players and longtime friends and collaborative partners of this Forever Green business. Richard Stroer, whom I've already introduced to you, is the president of the Land Institute. Mark Muller, in his current incarnation, is executive director of the Regenerative Agriculture Foundation.
So I coached middle school basketball for several years, and I think it's a great example of collective action. And I wanted to talk a little bit about the finite game and infinite game. Have people heard this term before? Finite versus infinite?
No.
So we're doing a little bit of both of these. And as a basketball coach, the finite game is how did the season go? Are you winning the games? Are the kids getting better? It's quantifiable about if you're having success or not. The infinite game is a little bit more about, am I helping contribute to making these kids to be better human beings? Are they going to have success in high school? Are they going to appreciate the joy of working together toward a goal? So those are more the infinite, much harder to measure goals that are also there. So I think you might see the parallel. We are obviously here, we're playing a finite game and we're playing an infinite game. Actually, talking to Peter again, the mention of Lyle and Cargill and that approach there, that seems like a very part of the very good finite game about making progress, making incremental progress, doing something more transactional. I call it my friends with Land Stewardship Project, as Peter also said, they're more transformational. It's about transforming the system. We need both. We clearly need both of those, and we need to figure out how we can have this come together and do both of those at the same time and not get upset when one person's on one side or the other's on the other side. The last thing I just wanted to say is that we have in this room and amongst all of our partners, we have a pretty good bevy. We have a team. We have a really good team. And as several people said, it takes a village. I think we really have the village to do the finite game right now. The infinite game is a little more complex, and we need to have partners that we can't really think about right now. And I just want to mention, like, the Midwest Farmers of Color Collective as an example of a group that doesn't really have a whole lot going on with this right now, but it could. There's an Emerging Farmers Conference that takes place in the fall every year, which is fantastic. It's one of my favorite conferences. There's so much energy and action and farmers just yearning to be on the land. Could there be connections there? It might not make a whole lot of sense for the finite game, but for the long term, I think that would make a lot of sense. Similarly, I would say, how about Farm Bureau? I don't think Farm Bureau's in this audience here. Just as an example, could it be working and trying to get on their platform that they would be supportive of continuous living cover? There's no reason it couldn't be, you know. So I guess what I would just say is I'd encourage. I'm thrilled with the day. I thought it just went so well, and I'm thrilled with all the great conversation that was had. And just think about that, how we can all think about. Some of us are in the finite game, and some of us are thinking more long term. And we need everyone to do that, not necessarily all coordinated, but heading and pushing in the same direction.
Thank you, Mark. Let the games begin. And Rachel.
Thanks. It has been an amazing day, and I was supposed to respond to the vision piece that Mitch just did in about 2 minutes. And so my response I'm going to try to keep to like 30 seconds, which is just to say that the commitment that Forever Green is making to double down and make sure that these crops, perennial and otherwise, actually are realized on the landscape is a commitment that we share. And so just to say we're with you, and the Land Institute is very much committed, especially on the perennial grains and in other regions, but also right here in Minnesota and the upper Midwest, to helping make that happen and doing it collaboratively. We've certainly decided that we can't have this transformative long game, the infinite game, happen individually. It requires all of the people and all of the farmers and all of the researchers and thousands more, frankly, than are engaged today for these kinds of crops to save humanity. And so we'll drink more Kernza and live instead of dying.